You hear lots of leaders talk about the fact, well, we have to get people back to work. This is kind of the norm right now. Across North America, there are companies who are bringing people back into work, right?
Yeah.
And they say it's because we're not getting the performance because people are working from home and they're
Hmm.
distracted and they're not putting in the time and so on and so forth. And you know, my own personal philosophy is that if you're doing a good job of leadership, it doesn't matter if they're home or at work, you will get performance, right? And if you're engaging people and if you're spending the time and developing the professional relationships, it doesn't matter. Now, there might be other reasons to bring them back into the office depending on the nature of their jobs,
Of course. Yeah.
but leadership should not be the reason.
All right. We're so excited today to have with us Corey Goulet, who is a Chief Regulatory Officer for Trans Mountain Corporation. Welcome to our show, Corey. We're so excited to have you and have this discussion.
Well, thanks for having me. It's great to talk about leadership, and it's great to talk about how we develop and get the most out of people.
Awesome. I can't wait to hear because you have such an extensive experience. I just know it's going to be a great discussion. So let's dive right in. I want to first recognize that, of course, you've led some massive infrastructure projects in the billions, which inevitably take very long delivery cycles, obviously by design. So, how do you sustain high performance in these high stake projects with teams without burning out for the long term success?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think first and foremost, and this might sound trite and simple, but you keep it fun for people, right?
Yeah.
And you get their engagement and commitment to a project, and you have to do a number of things to do that.
Hmm.
And there's a number of tactics that you employ. Having a clear understanding what the objective is behind their work, how they're involved in meeting that objective, what their personal relationship is with the success of the project is absolutely key for keeping people engaged and committed to the project.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. Do you find that a big difference between approaching, let's say, a 34 billion expansion, which sounds so unimaginable for most people, versus, day-to-day operations of an organization? Is there a different way to adapt the leadership style for the different initiatives?
There's slight differences. There's probably more differences in non-leadership elements of those two jobs, if you will.
Hmm.
The leadership is quite similar, actually.
Yeah, fair.
I,
Yeah.
I think one of the things you struggle with on bigger projects is you often have a lot of people who are not employees that you've hired specifically for that job. One of the things I always try to do is treat those people as employees in terms of the way you engage with them. Obviously, there's a different employment contract, and
Uh-huh.
you have to be careful, relative to that. But relative to the way that you lead them, you treat them just like you do any employee that you would have in an operating role. And I think
Hmm.
that's the key.
Yes, actually, I totally agree with that. I love that perspective. Recently, I've actually had somebody push back on creating a performance culture for a short, let's say for an initiative, transformation initiatives with a multi-year. And we had a really interesting discussion about how, we're not talking about a short gig here. We're going to be working together. And even though our contracts underlining bring us together in a different way, it's worthwhile building, some of those culture elements and, how we work together for a long term. So I really
Well,
love that you highlighted that.
yeah, if you don't build culture and if you
Mhm.
don't lead the same, you'll never get the results. If everyone's just a hired gun and a mercenary, you'll never get the results.
I love that. That's a quotable quote, I would say. And then from somebody coming at it from, I find always interesting coming at it from a technical background, you're talking about culture being a key driver of performance. So I just want to underline that because it's also, it's easy to dismiss sometimes from big leadership or technical people.
So one of the things in the most recent project that I worked on, and
Mhm.
I've done this in other projects as well, we
Mhm.
actually had a culture and collaboration initiative.
Mm.
called, it was Comida was and the name doesn't really mean much. It's a made up name, but the initiative was developed to create the culture and collaboration with a strong emphasis on leadership and commitment in order for us to be successful. And without that, we would have never succeeded on this project and other projects that I worked on and with other companies.
I love that. Yeah, that shows the intentionality behind it. And even as you say quickly, comida, which I agree, meaningless outside, but it's actually to me, would it touch on a bit of a tip for a powerful use of labels because that does become, I think, a very powerful tool for those who are a part of the initiative and who that starts to be something to easily refer to and build up and sustain over time.
And yeah, I'll just give you a little bit more background on the information. Comida actually came from, we had 15,000 people working on the project, and we created a the name off of a contest that we had. And so we allowed
Okay.
any of those 1,500 people to provide a name,
Mm,
and it was through children of those 15,000 people. And they provided a name and a drawing that we ended up using as the label, as the art for the initiative.
very cool.
And actually, a niece of one of our workers came up with Kamita, and Kamita represents chemotherapy. Her mother had
Mm,
suffered with cancer, and they were going through chemotherapy, and they called it Kamita for short. And it was the way of taking a challenge and defeating it. And so
mm.
she had this nice half page write up about it, but we end up using that. But if you know the backstory, when you think of how you can take a challenge and overcome it, it's a great name too.
And that is a great story. That's awesome. I mean, it also highlights obviously employee engagement in naming and then the creating of an emotional connection to the challenge at hand, which feeds the purpose and the commitment that's needed for long-term success.
That's right. That's
Awesome. Thank you so much for that example. That's very cool. I got goosebumps from it. Just sharing it. Yeah, that's obviously powerful. So yeah, I'm going to jump in right away also into this because I'm always very curious to hear from senior leaders who have made this transition from a technical role to executive leadership. What leadership, I don't like to say blind spots, but say challenges do high performing technical professionals typically have in making such a transition?
I'll talk about two aspects. I'll talk first of all about the transition from a technical expert, maybe a manager of technical experts, to a director.
Mhm.
And I actually believe that the director is the toughest role in most organizations,
Okay.
because a director has to work in the details with the people who work under them, the managers and the
Mhm.
individual contributors, but they also have to work right to the boardroom in terms of preparing information for the boardroom. And it requires you to go up and down in this level of detail and this understanding more than any other job in a company. And so directors are absolutely critical to the success of companies, right?
Mhm.
And so the first transition a person makes in their career as they move to the executive is actually going from manager to a director. And
Mhm.
how well you do that and how successful you are at doing that transition and working in both camps at the same time is important. I think the second part I would say is, as an executive, what you have to understand, I have this philosophy on where I should spend my time as an executive.
Mhm.
25% of my time, a quarter of my
Mhm.
time should be spent on vision and strategy.
Mhm.
My job is to create a vision on what we're trying to succeed with and the high level strategies on how we're going to get there, and then allowing others to, develop the tactics and the means to do that, right? 25% is around people. It's,
Mhm.
what is my organizational structure? What are my resources? Who are my leaders who are going to lead underneath me? And
Mhm.
it's absolutely critical that you get that right. 25% of my time is spent on relationships, both
Mhm.
internal with colleagues, my boss,
Mhm.
and other departments within the company. And then 25% is external folks who are involved in whatever you're working on. And then
Mhm.
only 25% of my time is spent on issue resolution. And it better be at the appropriate level if you're only spending a quarter of your time. You have to delegate the authority and accountability to do things to the appropriate level in the organization. Trust them, allow them to make mistakes from time to time, and only work on the things that are so critical on the project that they require your input. And so a
Mhm.
big part of moving from a technical to an executive role is understanding what your job is, which is not the technical piece.
Yes. I mean, I think you nailed nailed that answer, I would say, but also that's a wealth of information you packed into that answer. I'm just gonna let's let's stay with it for a little bit because I think there's so much in there. So I totally appreciate you highlighting the criticality of the director role. We've come to call that the squeeze because you get that you're really hearing from the execs and then you're bottom up hearing from the individuals who are delivering. So it takes really a multifaceted skills to manage that translation and all of the things coming at you, and not to mention plus the external things that you are starting to deal with at that level as well. So um, that's a really critical highlight, and I really appreciate you highlighting how critical that is to organizational success, not just their individual success. Secondly, you shared this beautiful framework about how you think about splitting your time, and I have to agree with you that I think that's one of the big things that I've come to realize that people don't realize how the role changes. Like everybody kind of wants a promotion notionally, but you know what? This is at the crux of how the responsibility change. Are you ready for that? Do you want that? Right? Is your role, and that's why I was going to ask you about is technical leaders who are often selected for some of these opportunities are achieving their own success. They're 100% individual contributors that buys them success, but that is not the recipe to success in these middle management layers.
That's
So
right.
that's it.
And, and I think people have to be realistic with themselves about what they want to do in their careers and what they're good at and what they have an aptitude for. Certainly, people can improve as leaders and expand and develop. But in a previous employer we recognized that there were some technical experts who didn't really want to be leaders, and so we
Yes.
created senior technical roles for them to fulfill their career ambitions without necessarily becoming the leaders.
Yes.
And often those senior technical roles got paid as much as a manager or a director, right? But they had a different focus to their jobs, right? And that's not to say it's any worse, it's just different.
So I'm a huge proponent, personally speaking, of that approach, and I've been aware of that from very early on in my career. I think it speaks to the maturity of the organization to realize that there should be a path up for technical talent, and exactly that's not capped by salaries ultimately, because you don't want the people putting up their hands for promotion for monetary reasons and then create this misalignment in roles. So
That's
I
right.
think that I share that viewpoint. I'm glad that you brought that up. But I was going to say, but the people who are talented, let's say the technical experts who are talented and want to move into people management and more of the leadership roles, responsibilities, do you have any ways that you've seen that's positive to support them in developing an understanding what success looks like at higher levels as they climb?
Well, I think there's a number of ways. First of all, everyone needs some basic leadership training, right? And I think
Yes.
it's important for every company to have invested the effort in how are we going to provide that leadership training to
Hmm.
people, right?
Hmm.
And it sets a common understanding across the entire corporation of what do we expect from our leaders, right?
Hmm.
That's important. The second one is they really need to get that leadership mentorship from their existing leaders. So if when people come to me and say, I'm interested in getting into leadership, you know, earlier in my career when I was a manager, I would say, okay, well, here's what we'll do in your development plan in order to prepare you for that. Right.
Hmm.
So it might be
Hmm.
something as simple as, I'm gonna put someone under you, a summer student or something like that, that you can start to do informal leadership. Right.
Hmm.
I I'm going to bring you to a board meeting and have you present at a board meeting so you can see what it takes, at a corporate level to do things, right?
Hmm.
We're going to spend some time talking about how do you lead a team. So it's an informal leadership role, but
Hmm.
what are the leadership tactics that you use when you're leading a project, for example?
Hmm.
And I think and you create maybe those opportunities for other opportunities for informal leadership. So there's lots of things you can do to prepare someone from going to an execute, from a technical role to a leadership role. But it's really the first line of management that needs to understand how to do that.
Fair. And that is ultimately, you want that middle management to have that skill to help build future leaders as well, right? So I hear you. Those are all very helpful examples. And it takes a mix of formal training and hands on support from others within an organization. The challenge typically happens when we try to scale that, right? So inevitably that happens. Either you work for large organizations like you built your career in, or even if you work for smaller organizations, if they're successful, they have the problem of the challenge of the good problem or of growth. So I just wonder how you found, and that's one of the things for sure I'm passionate about and tackling with I Live Performance as well. So I just wanted to ask you, the approaches for providing that formal leadership training at scale, as well as some of the engagement that, again, that it's required, and then again, a little bit at scale. What your thoughts are, or what you've seen work.
Yeah, I think what's important is consistency.
Hmm.
What's important is continuous learning and training. If
Hmm.
you go to a leadership course once a month, once a year, it's not going to do it for you. So it
Yes,
has to
yes.
be all the time reinforcing what you've learned and learning new things as you go along. I mean, I think this is one of the huge advantages of the internet, right?
Hmm.
Is it allows us to do these things so much easier than we once could, right? And so
Hmm.
I think leadership training, for people who did it well, 30 or 40 years ago before the internet was we got people together frequently. Like
Hmm.
once a month, we're going to get people together and, tackle new leadership topics and so forth. Now you can get that all online. You can have people, you know, go and do their training when it's convenient for them.
Hmm.
They and focus on those topics which they've agreed with their leader that they need more development on. And
Hmm.
so that's fantastic that we have those opportunities. There's many options available, including your own. But we have a couple that we use for senior leaders and middle management leaders in our company, right? And
Hmm.
so I think that's absolutely critical. And you have to pick the ones that are work best for your organization and focus on the right things, right?
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. I've heard that you've had success building leadership, scaling some leadership training with LinkedIn Learning. So I just wanted to wonder if you can share any, cool anecdotes or, your favorite ways to think about it in the context, again, of scaling some of the learnings and using the technology
Yeah,
to
yeah,
support
yeah. We
journey.
u- we use LinkedIn Learning, for some of our basic training, and we actually use a SAPE program for some of our other training. First of all, I was surprised at how much they're used.
Mm,
And how much people are looking for that and
mm,
looking for the flexibility that I talked about earlier in being able to choose when they actually take the training and what they focus on that they think will help their careers.
mm,
And we've got, 78% of our first line leaders are using LinkedIn regularly, right? And so that, I mean, the fact that they do that means that, their leaders are enforcing that well, reinforcing the need to do that, or they're self-selecting that they want to do this to improve their leadership and move on to newer levels, right?
yes. Oh yeah, that's a very impressive high engagement with that tool. That obviously speaks volumes that it's bringing them content that they need on demand and in connection. I like that idea too. Again, still in connection with people. And I'm a technologist, always embracing technology as a tool, but I always love when we still highlight that people need people and they're, key part of the equation.
That's right. That's right. Encouragement, mentoring, and is so important part of any form of leadership.
Yes, awesome. So I know we talked about long-term projects with some and what leadership can look like, and you shared about the one of the challenges being the mix of the teams. But I wonder if we look within the organization and consider your experience across regulatory, technical, and get all different functions, right? That you've worked with. Do you see themes that are similar across different functions? And is there differences in functions for when we consider leadership and performance?
You know, as I said, I think the technical aspects of a job, the functional aspects of the job are more different than the leadership are.
Yes, agreed.
I
Yeah.
think leadership is about connecting with people, and you only connect with people I mean, humans being humans, you only connect by using similar techniques. So I have
Mhm,
a couple different philosophies
mhm,
about leadership. One is I actually read a book called Radical Candor by Kim Scott. I don't know if you're
mhm.
familiar with the book, but
No, I haven't. Yeah, yeah.
there's two philosophies that
Mhm.
she brings forward in the book, and when I read the book, I went, "Hey, that's the way I lead," right? And
Oh,
the
okay.
first is you have to develop a professional relationship with people.
Mhm,
You have to understand what makes them tick
mhm,
because everyone's a little bit different. And
mhm.
the second is you have to be as candid with people and teams as you can be because no one wants to be surprised when they get a pink slip and they get released from a company and it's like, I didn't know that I wasn't performing. Right. And so those are the aspects she focuses on in the book. And relative to the first around creating professional relationship, it comes back to one of my other philosophies, which is you have to use situational leadership.
Hmm,
Not every person wants to be led the same way. Not
mhm,
every person reacts the same way. And so you have to understand what makes them tick, how they want to interact with their leader, and in order for you to be successful at touching everyone in your team.
mhm.
And so I think that's so very important in understanding not just people's style, but what are the things outside of work
Yes.
that are creating the environment at work, right, for them. And you know, if you don't get a chance, read the book. It's
Yeah,
fantastic,
I
and I think
absolutely
it
will.
goes to situational leadership. But I think this situational leadership and being transparent and being candid and creating professional relationships is the same everywhere. Back to your
Sure.
original question. It doesn't matter if you're on a technical project, if you're in a functional area, you have to use those same techniques.
Yeah, I love that. And I totally agree. I think leadership skills are leadership skills, but there's room to make them your own and make them effective for the person that you are working with, depending on what makes them tick, their natural inclinations, and the purpose, really what we're working with. And that's what, once you get that parity, that's what the time and energy should be spent on to really make a difference.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah, awesome. I want to just come back to the concept of just ask you a little bit more about sustainable performance. Of course, we touched on that you work on these multi-year big projects, and you're literally the epitome of the say when people say it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. That's literally what you're always leading, right? You're living in the long-term stakes marathons. So thinking back on I mean, I know you mentioned connecting to purpose, and that's of course keeps the motivation going. But have you learned some telltale signs when you think a team is in reaching plateau or an individual is showing signs of may it be burnout or needing a break, right? And so I just wonder if you can touch on, what do you watch out for to help the team or individuals keep it going?
Yeah, you know, I think there's a number of performance related things that point to burnout, and there's a
Hmm.
number of non-performance factors that are clues that people are burning out. Right? Obviously, the performance related ones are, you know, you have KPIs for your area, and when you
Hmm.
start to see performance through those business KPIs waning, you know, one of the first things you should think about is, you know, is this a motivation problem? Is this a commitment problem? And is it because of my leadership that you know, that I'm not
Hmm.
getting that anymore? Right.
Hmm.
So those are telltale signs. But on the non-performance side of things, you look at their excitement, you look at how much fun they're having, you know, when they come to work, when they leave from work,
Okay, yeah.
how they're interacting with people, all of those things. And in order to do that, you have to create the professional relationship where you understand it. And
Yeah.
you'll get lots of clues if you're a good leader and you're listening to people about whether they're motivated or not, about whether they burned out, right? And so I think you have to look at both pieces of information to understand that.
I love that. But yeah, speaking of data, so of course I know you must, you live in data. You mentioned KPIs right away as a key indicator. Of course, knowing about pipeline operations, data probably is a huge indicator of safety, success, progress. But when we look at leadership, what's the role that you think data plays in leadership? And do you have any specific examples to share about how you measure leadership or your leadership pipeline in data?
Yeah. Let me talk about the business side of it first.
Yeah.
And I talked about 25% of my job is developing the vision and the strategies necessary for the project or the functional area to be successful.
Hmm.
So you need to do that well with your leadership team. You need to get buy-in and commitment from that leadership team, and you need to roll it down effectively because leadership is making sure that you get the most out of people and them understanding the business and what the drivers are and what the strategies you're trying to employ is a big part of leadership. And then below that, you create the tactics and the
Yeah.
KPIs that you can measure that, right?
Yeah.
So that's the first sign of understanding if using data to create information to understand if the leadership is going well.
Hmm.
The second one is on the non-business related side, engagement. Are you doing engagement surveys? Do you understand if your employees are engaged? Do you understand what are the issues that you need to correct as leaders, right? To get more engagement, doing 360-degree feedbacks with your leaders and them getting the input from bosses, their colleagues, the subordinates, the people who work for them is very important in terms of getting the data back to people that they can understand
To
where their
proceed.
leadership gaps.
Okay, that's nice. So yeah, so actually, so measuring leadership skills themselves, because that's what is critical for some of the success, engagement, the pulse checks, and then 360 feedback with a two-way channel. Again, that's a healthy mix of tools, data, and human inputs, right? So it's a bit of it takes a a village, if you will, to get the full picture and maintain it over time.
Yeah, that is well summarized.
So when we talk about this over time, this is one of the key things that we're finding that we're looking to highlight and change. And I know you will agree because of everything you've said. But we doing a lot of linking to say performance habits and leadership skills and habits versus sometimes a traditional view. There's a big difference between those two, and it takes quite a big mindset shift to consider. No, I'm a leader who practices this as a regular way of life and work. So I wonder if you view it this way, or if you've made this connection with speaking about it as habits. And if you think back on your successful career, what is the importance of daily habits for performance or leadership that you've used and that have served you well over time?
Yeah, I talked at the beginning about 25% of your time has to be spent as a senior leader on people, right?
Hmm.
And it's a myriad of functions below that. One is just making sure you have the right organizational structure. The second is, do you have the right people, and the right leaders in the right positions and the right teams to be successful? But below that is, how are you engaging them, right? And there's a bunch of engagement tactics that I've used over my career to make sure that I'm continuing to focus on a regular basis on leadership, right? One of the ones, and this may sound simple, but I've led teams of hundreds and thousands of people, and depending on the size of the team, I once had a team of about 400 people, and my goal was to have a lunch or breakfast with each one of them twice a year.
Cool.
And so I would go with groups of 5 to 6 people to talk to
Right.
them about how you guys doing? What's your jobs like? Are you enjoying what you're doing? Is there any feedback you'd provide to me? Finding safe space for them to talk about their jobs, but you have to make it continuous, right? You
Right.
have to create a routine by which you do that, right?
Yes.
You can't do it one of, right? Just
Yes.
like we talked earlier about training, you can't just go once a year to a leadership training and go, yeah, now I'm going to use that the rest of the year, right? You can't just do performance feedback twice a year, mid year, and the end of the year. You have to be doing performance feedback all the time,
Yeah.
right? And so every element of leadership has to be practiced on a regular basis, and you have to make it part of your job as a leader,
Yes.
right?
Yes. I love that. So that actually, you can take that kind of line of thinking. So whatever the type of person or type of leader you want to be, you have to actually consider what's a regular cadence of this, like ongoing basis. And that then you're starting to develop the skills in the right way. And then brings you to the next question of bandwidth, right? Like just like how do you make it all fit within the
Well,
day, the month, the year, right?
that's right. Fit and be sustainable,
And
right?
sustainable. Yes, that's absolutely. So it's easy to say, I want to meet with everybody directly, right? You're like, oh, yes, that sounds great. But you're like, okay, it could take me a whole year if I have a giant team. And it's like, I create a weekly slot in the calendar where every week, I'm meeting with the next set of leaders.
That's right.
No, that's a very practical way to look at it. Yes, it can be simple, but the simplest things are always not the easiest. So I was going to ask you actually, recently, one of these podcasts, I was talking to a really hands-on intentional leader, COO in California. And he actually raised kind of a rule of thumb I had not heard before. He also really believed in his personal touch, even as the team was under mega scaling growth, and made a point of meeting every leader once, like definitely every new addition to the team, and then regularly a touch point. And he shared that there's a rule of thumb there. It becomes hard to maintain that one-on-one connection above 150. He said that was like the big magic number. Have you heard that before, or have you felt
I,
something like that?
yeah, I haven't heard it, but I think it's a good number.
Okay, yeah, checks out, checks out. Yeah.
But when I've had teams under 150 or under a couple hundred people, it's been much easier. You get to 400 or 500 people, it's tough. Think of my last effort was 15,000 people, right?
Hmm.
And
Yes.
1,500 leaders within those 15,000 people, right?
Nice.
and
Yes.
and there's no way that you can touch every one of the 1,500 leaders. And so that is where it's very important for you to cascade down expectations,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
One of the things, and I'll get back to our Comida initiative.
Hmm.
So we had this Comida initiative around collaboration and culture, but one of the biggest elements of that initiative was leadership.
Hmm.
And we provided training to all 1,500 people who
Hmm.
weren't employees, who were actually contractors working on the
Oh,
project
very cool.
throughout the entire length of the project, 4 years, right? And that training was about reinforcing the 8 pillars of leadership.
Hmm.
And I should mention the company who I've used for several different projects and functional areas. Alkumi, they're called, out
Okay.
of London, England. And Alkumi means watering hole
Oh, okay.
in Australian Aboriginal languages, and it's a place to meet, to bring people together. And isn't that what
Cool.
leadership is all about? Right? This company, Alkumi, Paul Taylor and his team do a great job at reinforcing the 8 pillars of leadership, and their commitment, caring, courageous, realistic, energetic, trusting, honest, and curious.
Hmm.
And so teaching leaders how to reinforce, how to live those 8 pillars of leadership is what we did across our product. There are very few projects where people spend the time that we did on leadership. But if you don't invest in leadership, you don't get the commitment, which is one of those 8 pillars. And
Yes.
therefore, and it doesn't cascade down to the entire project, and you don't get the performance that you're looking for.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. Certainly, putting those elements into practice is a habit that needs to be maintained. I think it touches on the idea of it's not just skills, it's a mindset, right? So a lot of those things you mentioned is how we think about things and how we approach different things. And then, of course, highlighting the investment you made into contract teams. That speaks volumes of how strongly you and the management team believe that brings benefits, right? Otherwise, why would you invest, right? And, it makes me think of the famous quote, and I can't think of the person now, but talks about, like, because there's a view of sometimes like, why would we train people? They will leave. What if they leave and we've invested in them and leave? And then I remember the quote goes like, what if you don't train them and they stay? And that's the way scarier proposition, right? So I,
Well,
I
well,
love that.
the worst thing you can have is people who stay and quit, right?
Yes,
Either at leadership levels or non-leadership levels, right?
yes, yes.
At leadership levels, it's even worse because they're affecting so many people.
Yes, agreed. That's actually one of the things when I started learning about some of the challenges, when I heard about this, there's many labels for it, but one of them is this quiet quitting where you're just like kind of showing up and not, I found it, I said like, it's one of the things I found the creepiest. Like I'm so like dealing with somebody who's telling you about challenges they're having and to you or others, and you can deal with that. But people who just kind of, you know, phone it in like that, I find it like, oh my gosh, how would you even know this is happening? And looking at the data, it seems very prevalent. And that's one of the challenges to weed that out. And it's really scary as a leader today.
So related to that, I
Mhm,
have I have an interesting philosophy
mhm,
about hybrid people working from home
mm,
for part of the time. And,
mhm.
you know, you hear lots of leaders talk about the fact, well, we have to get people back to work. This is kind of the norm right now. Across North America, there are companies who are bringing people back into work, right?
Yeah,
And they say it's because we're not getting the performance because people are working from home and they're
mhm,
distracted and they're not putting in the time and so on and so forth. And, you know, my own personal philosophy is that if you're doing a good job of leadership, it doesn't matter if they're home or at work, you will get performance, right? And if you're engaging people and if you're spending the time and developing the professional relationships, it doesn't matter. Now, there may be other reasons to bring them back into the office depending on the nature of their jobs,
of course. Yeah.
but leadership should not be the reason. And I also believe that if you have people working from home, you have to lead different ways,
Hmm.
right? So it's not just rolling into someone's office like you might do at work and saying, "How you doing?" and, "How's the project going?" or whatever. You have to like, go on Teams and say, "Hey, just checking in with you," right? And so there's a different leadership tactics that are required when people are working from home. But I don't
Yeah.
think working from home necessarily means people can quiet quit or quit, stay quit or whatever the term you want to use in their office down the hall just as easily, right? Be on the internet, not be performing. And as a leader, if you're not engaged with them, you won't know that either, right?
Either. Yes. I mean, we could talk about a whole podcast on that, but I just have to say thank you for bringing that up, that viewpoint up. And I mean, I wholeheartedly agree. Leadership doesn't really have geography, geography implications. And exactly, the challenges can be on both sides. But I love the idea, again, coming back to it just takes different tactics. It can look different. Like leadership can exist at every level, different functions. It just looks different, even though the fundamentals are the same. That's one of the things that we keep coming back to. And I think it's such a powerful theme to really resonate multiply for sure. I mean, I have to take advantage of this unique position to have you such an accomplished leader in such a high stakes game, and to ask a little bit. You're dealing with lots of external stakeholders in your position, um, and everybody, of course, is in their own way, especially in the C-suite. But really, in your role, you're working with different levels of government, indigenous communities, environmental groups. Some of the decisions are public. They face even political scrutiny from different elements. So obviously that's a very complex external stakeholder environment with big internal stakeholders challenges as well. So I just wonder if there's anything particular that you highlight with leadership skills in dealing with such a complex landscape of stakeholders.
Yeah, well, I talked about it earlier in terms of 25% of your job is
Yeah.
relationship, right?
Mhm.
And I actually believe that so you have to focus on it, I guess is
Yep.
Maybe I'll just end that point. So you have to focus on it, make sure you're spending the time on it. And I think, developing relationships with internal and external stakeholders is not too much different than leadership in some ways. It's a part of leadership, but you do it the same sort of way as you do with your employees, right? You create a professional relationship with them. You understand
Yep.
what makes them tick. You
Right.
understand what the drivers are that affect them. And even though, there's lots of people who might not agree with you, you don't take it personally, and
Yeah.
and you try to understand their perspective because they're not necessarily wrong, they just have a different perspective. And
Mm.
so, my philosophy has always been spend the time, right? Spend the
Yeah.
time with the external stakeholders and internal stakeholders to understand their perspective and create that relationship that you will solve problems together and come up with win-win situations which are mutually beneficial to people.
Perfect. It's still, again, back to basics, even in this heightened state of big billions of dollars in the line, governments, we're still back to people knowing people, fundamental leadership skills cuts through all of the noise.
And
I
I'm
love
going to
that.
reconnect this. I'm going to reconnect this to bringing people back into the office. So many companies are doing
Yes.
that.
Yes.
I think the hybrid working environment is so beneficial for certain people at certain times of their lives that I think it's unfortunate when companies go completely away from it, and they have to create the flexibility that
Hmm.
that that people need to be successful at home as well as at work,
Yes. I
to
love
find
that.
that work-life balance.
Yes.
Well, one of the reasons you need people in the office together. I mean, I remember 30 years ago when people used to say the entire workforce is going to be virtual, right?
Yes. Too far.
But
Too
what they
far.
forgot is that's not human nature.
Mm.
And so one of the reasons you bring people together is to create the relationships, right?
Yes. Yes.
Because we are people. I mean, various platforms like the one we're on or Teams or, are successful at simulating that, but it's even better when you're together. And why you have to bring people into work is for two or three different groups of people. One, people who are new in their career. They
Hmm.
need the ability to interact with other people in the organization on a one-on-one basis in person. Two is people new to your organization, right?
Hmm.
Who have to understand the culture. They have to understand the corporate values in order for them to be successful. And
Yeah.
number three is for teams to work together more effectively. So
Yes.
I don't ever believe any company could be completely virtual. You need to create opportunities for people to engage as humans do.
I love that view again. And then thank you for bringing us back to that. It's always keeping that purpose in mind, isn't it? And then the tools that we have. So when we are getting work done, if we can use technology to help us have that flexibility that's really required for survival in today's modern world, right? Of we use the tools then, but then then in person, we keep a purpose to the in-person time. That's what drives me nuts is when companies don't think through to say, okay, come to the office 2 days a week, but then nobody's in at the same time, and then you end up just on calls.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's missing the purpose of the thing, right? It's like what can tech not help with is those informal, authentic conversations. That's what we get together for. So it's outcome driven both ways and the best of both worlds.
I was the leader of a business development organization for a large construction company before I came to
Mhm.
this job through COVID.
Oh yes.
And during that time period, as we were coming out of it, one of our leaders said, "Aren't you going to be happy, Corey? Because your team's going to be that much more productive in business development now that we can see each other." And I said, "Actually, I think we were more productive when we were
Yes.
in the COVID environment." And the reason is that I didn't have to go to Toronto and spend 2 days going there and back for a 2-hour meeting. I could go
Right.
online and have the same 2-hour meeting. And provided that I had a previous relationship with the person, that worked effectively,
Fine. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so now as you come out of that environment 5 years later, I think people get together with others, particularly initially when they're creating a relationship, professional relationship with each other, and then
Mhm.
and then periodically from time to time. But there's lots of quick meetings that you can do just as effectively on Teams and still
Yes,
see the
absolutely.
person and still understand, you know, not just the verbal cues, but the physical cues, the nonverbal cues, and understand what's important in the conversation. And so I think the mixture of
That makes
the technology is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this information. It's been like enlightening for me personally, for sure. I want to end on asking you, looking back from it's always I love a good hindsight question because we always learn the best looking backwards. So, looking at the successful career and the progression you've made, is there a really important lesson? And I know you shared many, but that you would just highlight for the leaders that are coming up in the world today that looks different, right? And has some different challenges than they had. But what's your kind of like big thing that you would encourage up and coming leaders?
So I've got probably a couple I'll share.
Please.
The first is be authentic.
I love that.
Don't change your personal style or who you are, and maintain your values. And I said early on in my career that I wasn't going to just do things to move up the ladder, that I was
Hmm.
going to continue to be the person I want to be genuine, to be ethical in order to succeed. And if I succeeded anyway, in spite, I didn't do things just to get ahead. And so that
Hmm.
would be my first piece of advice, right?
Hmm.
Um, the second one is spend more time managing down than you do up.
Oh, interesting.
A lot of times, people early in their kind of leadership path will start to spend more time
Yeah.
trying to satisfy the person above them than leading the team below them.
Yes.
And that can that can get you short-term results in terms
Mm,
of being promoted, but long term, you won't have you won't have the muscles to be a good leader, and you will not have done the team under you very much good, right? You've actually degraded the performance of your organization by doing that.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and you know, the third one is just making sure that that you're considering everyone on the team as you lead and as you move up, and that you continue to be modest and humble, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Regardless of what your successes are, and you remember that we're all really cut from the same cloth as human beings, and no one's better than anyone else.
I love that. But thank you so much for these for that to end on. I honestly I really love the focus on the fundamentals and the long-term success that have first certainly percolated through this whole conversation and then you ended up on as well. It's really great to see that view that pays off in the long term. That's something I deeply believe in. So it's just wonderful to see you share that sentiment from your successful perspective. Thank you so much for your time and energy today, Corey.
Well, thank you so much. It's been really interesting hearing your thoughts as well,
Yes.
and it's all about continuous learning our entire lives, isn't
Yes, totally. Yes. I know, I'm sorry, I always jump in because I can't help myself because I like to share a little bit, but especially when I wildly agree. So I jumped in, but I'm glad you appreciate that. Thank you.
it? No problem.